Hello and welcome back to another Eduro Learning Facebook Live session. Today's topic is called Overexposed, helping your child manage and navigate a media-rich world. Kind of the theme for today is that we are constantly bombarded with media in the form of advertising that we're kind of used to maybe disliking or being able to kind of dismiss. But there's other forms of media that are coming at us, and it's the media that we're selecting to look at. And the impact of that media is what I want to talk about today. So basically, we've had previous sessions where we talked about managing distractions, and we talked about places and ways that students and children are hanging out in online spaces. One of the things we haven't talked about yet, though, is what kind of messaging they're getting in those spaces. And for parents of children who are spending a lot of time in spaces like YouTube or Instagram or these kind of really media-rich spaces, we want to talk about both the good and the bad sides of that. And at Eduro Learning, we are really passionate about the good sides of all of these spaces. We're really passionate about the ways that kids can learn and kind of develop their skills in online spaces, but we also want to make sure that parents like you are aware of the challenges that those spaces can present. So here we go. I'm going to have kind of three parts to today. Oh, and I didn't mention that I'm coming to you from my parents' backyard. This is actually the house that I grew up in and the backyard that I looked out on from my bedroom window. And I would not be at all surprised if at some point during this session a deer walks behind me on the lawn. I'm in Connecticut right now, so it's a little bit kind of dark and cloudy, so I don't know if it's going to rain, but I'm going to give it a try anyway. All right, so three sections for today. The first section is going to be about the positive things that we think are happening in social spaces online, particularly for learning opportunities. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the challenges, the areas that parents might really want to be aware of. You might already be aware of these things, and maybe kind of just talking them out will help kind of clarify what's going on there. And then the third thing, where hopefully I'll spend the most time, is some strategies or skills that you can work with your children on to help them be really prepared to be successful in these spaces, to be making good choices, and to feel confident that your children are kind of learning and experiencing this media-rich world in a safe and productive, positive way. Okay, so let's get started. First thing is the positive kind of great things that are happening in media-rich spaces online. And I have so many examples. I have shared a bunch of them in a blog post I wrote this week, which I will link to in the comments as soon as I'm done here. But the lots of examples that I see are kids and teens learning about things that they're passionate about, being able to explore those things in a space that is comfortable for them, that provides them the opportunity to learn from people who know just enough more than they know that they can really actively engage in the learning experience. And I talked about this a little bit, I don't think it was last week, but a couple of weeks ago, about that kind of authentic community that builds up when we're learning in social spaces. So not only are kids learning exactly what they're really interested in learning, not only are they learning it from people that are just enough more experienced than them that they can really feel like they can take ownership and move forward, but they're also getting that authentic connection of a community of learners in these spaces. So some examples could be learning how to break dance. I have a great video for parents, if you haven't seen it before, linked in my blog post. Learning how to play music, learning how to cook a meal, any kind of tutorial type thing that you might actually use the internet for too, your kids are doing the same thing. And often it's things that there really isn't time for them to learn during the normal traditional school day. So it's something that they're learning on their own time, out of their own passion, out of their own interest. And very often they're developing those skills in these kind of social spaces like YouTube, exploring their skills, learning from people who are just enough better than them, and then sharing their learning back too. So that's the really highlight positive, is they can learn pretty much whatever they want, whenever they want. And because this is media rich, they can usually pause and rewind and watch again and keep practicing until they get better. So they have the opportunity to do what we call in education circles mastery learning. Keep going, keep practicing, keep trying, keep failing, and keep improving until they get it. So being able to do that on their own time, to learn things that they might not have the opportunity to learn, either because there isn't specifically time in school or because they don't have access to the educational opportunities that they need to be able to learn these things. Like the one example that I've linked in my blog post is about a girl who learns awesome breakdancing. Well, maybe in her town, she doesn't have the opportunity to learn from a professional in a face-to-face setting. She can still do that. She can still follow her passion because she has access to a tool like YouTube. So there's this idea that in these social spaces, in these media-rich spaces, kids can be exposed to ideas and opportunities for learning that they're really passionate about, that they normally would not have the opportunity to learn in their specific physical setting. That is the positive, in my opinion, or at least one of the positives, in my opinion, a key positive. So that's kind of topic number one, is this great opportunity for learning anytime, anywhere, from people who are just enough better than you can actually kind of keep going and be empowered and passionate about it. And you can select who you follow, so you can select the people that really meet your needs. I'll give you a small example from myself. I personally am learning how to be a power lifter, and I am in a certain weight class, so I tend to follow other people who are also learning to be power lifters, who are also in my weight class, so I can feel like, oh, I'm really, moving along at the speed that I should be moving along, or I need to try this type of training because that's really working for that person. It's really individualized and personalized for me, just like it can be for your child. All right, number two, kind of the other side of the coin, the negative side, is that because we're in these spaces and we're choosing who we follow, maybe on Instagram, maybe on Snapchat, maybe on YouTube, we can easily be exposed to content that may exploit our insecurities or may perpetuate kind of a negative thought line, something that maybe as parents, if we knew our kids were exposed to those things, we'd want to talk to them about it. A couple of examples could be, there are lots of Instagram and YouTube accounts and Snapchat accounts for people who are what I would call fitspo, people who are really fit and they want to be inspirational, but actually the body type that they're portraying is really unrealistic. Either they're genetically gifted, or they're using Photoshop, or they're altering their body in ways that maybe you would not want your child to do. But because your kids are potentially seeing those things in their same Instagram feed that they're seeing their friends' pictures, it might feel like they should be able to look like that, for example. Other kinds of accounts that I would say are kind of along the same lines are things like lifestyle accounts. And I did happen to mention one specific example, which is the Rich Kids of Instagram account. And maybe that's one that people often pick on, so I'm sorry to keep picking on them. But it's an account of billionaire children who are doing things that billionaire children do and then post them on Instagram. And again, if your child is seeing those things in their same Instagram or YouTube feed, they might be thinking that they should have access to a private yacht or a, $14,000 watch or whatever they might see in these social media feeds. So the idea that we can connect with other people who feel real and just like us, it's the benefit in that kind of positivity learning area. But in this case, it's kind of negative because it can exploit maybe insecurities or concerns or maybe weaknesses that your child has for whatever reason and make them feel like they should be doing this, or they should be looking like this, or they should be wearing these kind of clothes, when in reality that is not attainable for them. Another kind of challenging issue in this same kind of negative vein is that there's a lot of graphic imagery, and in particular porn, in the digital world. We all know that, right? So what's happening is we're seeing that boys younger and younger are being exposed to really graphic images, and it's kind of altering their perception of what romantic relationships should be like. And girls aren't seeing those things, and they're tired of being held to the same expectations as the boys think are normal, because that's what they see in these online spaces. So kind of these three areas for me are three that I would say are really worth talking about and having kind of regular, authentic, open and honest conversations with your kids about, because even though your child might not be seeing these things, chances are their friends have seen them and it's come up in conversation. So you want to kind of know what your child is being exposed to so that you can talk to them about it. Because just seeing or experiencing these things a couple of times is not going to have a life-altering impact on them. But you not talking to them about it might maybe encourage them to keep looking, and maybe that's not what you want them to be doing. So, knowing that there's good and bad, means that we don't want to keep children away from these spaces because there are great opportunities for learning. But it also means that we have a responsibility as parents, as adults in their lives, to help them understand what they're seeing, to make sense of what they're seeing, and to help them recognize that there are some things that are really great, and there are some things that maybe aren't part of their everyday physical lives that maybe they should be recognizing. So in this blog post that I will share in a minute, and also in this week's freebie, thank you, Chrissy, for sharing that here, we talked about some kind of strategies that you can have with your children so that they are understanding both the good and bad of these spaces. So, and before I get into those kind of skills, strategies, and conversation starters, I do want to say that for most of the children that I have worked with, they are really aware of what's kind of photoshopped and what's like not realistic in online spaces. They kind of have a good filter for that in general, maybe even more so than we do as adults, but that doesn't mean it's not worth taking some time to talk about this with them. So, some of the skills you might want to highlight with your child are ones that we might call in the education world media literacy. And these are just a few examples that I've been thinking about in the last week as I've been kind of prepping for this Facebook Live. And one is being able to judge when something's coming from a trusted source. Being able to tell that this person really does know what they're talking about and they're not kind of presenting a false narrative of their life, which often happens on social media, right? So often social media is the highlight reel of somebody's life and not the reality. So that skill of being able to judge when something's coming from a trusted source and something is authentic is a really critical one for kids to have, especially when they're being bombarded with media from so many different places and it really feels like they're real people on the other end of the phone. So some of the things you could talk about with your kids is you could say, who made this? How do you know? What else can you find about them? What other things, what other resources reference this same resource online? Who's talking about this same person? What are they saying? How do you know what they're saying is really accurate? And so kind of triangulating sources to make sure that what this person is sharing is accurate is a really important critical skill, not just for what you find on social media, but anytime you're doing fact checking. But it works really well, especially when your kids get invested in the social media people that they follow. It's really good to see that the people they're following are sharing accurate information. And if they're not, it's worth having a conversation about that. Another skill that's worth talking about with your children is the understanding that media can be easily edited and faked online. And I think kids are really strong in understanding this. Lots of kids are really strong in understanding this already, but it is well worth talking about again. Things that you can ask them are, how do you know this is real? Are there any clues in the image or the video or in the account to help you determine if it's real or not? And I think the kind of point behind that is we can't accept everything we see online at face value, and just having those regular conversations with kids that it's not just, school stuff that we have to evaluate or fact check. It's also stuff we see in our personal lives. And there are lots of great examples of, people photoshopping images and people, let's say, getting implants, for example, so that you can point to those kinds of examples that are in the news that we see all the time and say, lots of images and media online is faked. We need to be able to think critically about those things every time we look. Another skill that I think we've talked about in another Facebook Live is just being cautious about what you share. So it's a great space for learning. It's a great space for sharing. It's a great space for demonstrating all the stuff that you've learned. But how much information do you want to share online? So thinking about who's going to see this when you post it, how did you decide to share it, what will your friends think when they see it? All of those kinds of conversations are really helpful for kids to be thinking about why they're sharing what they're sharing. And even if there's something they really want to share, it might even be a small change in the caption or choosing not to geotag the location that's worth having a conversation about with your child. And the last skill I wanted to mention is understanding and recognizing the appropriateness of the content they explore and the context in which they're viewing it. That's kind of a complicated mouthful, but the idea behind that is looking at really explicit imagery is maybe not appropriate for children younger than puberty. but that's actually the reality of what's happening. So having a conversation with your kids about what they look at and when they look at it and what they're seeing and what that means is really valuable. So some kinds of questions you can ask are things like, how do you feel when you see this? Would you show this to your teacher or a friend or a friend's parent? And even thinking about, I think Emily mentioned it a couple of Facebook Lives ago, even if you don't want to directly ask your child, you could ask them, do your friends look at things like this? What do your friends see when they see this? What do your friends think when they see this? What do your friends tell you about the things that they see? So if it doesn't feel comfortable for you to talk to your child directly about what they're seeing, you can always make it about their friends. Have your friends looked at things like this? And that will give you a clue to what they're looking at, even if you're not directly asking them about themselves. So that was kind of all I wanted to cover in today's Facebook Live, and just want to kind of summarize that for you. Social media has pluses and minuses, two sides of the same coin. There's lots of great opportunities for learning and sharing and demonstrating learning and being an independent learner and getting that personalized learning. But there's also lots of exposure to things that maybe we don't want our children exposed to. And so to help them understand what they're seeing, the really critical part as a parent is to have regular conversations with them about what they're seeing and get a better understanding of what they're actually looking at, and then have them share with you how that makes them feel, what questions they have, what they're wondering about, what's challenging for them, so that you as a parent can guide them. Because the reality is, even if you're not comfortable with the actual tool they're using to access the content, you know about the world. You have lived old enough to have a child. You know how to take care of that child. So just having those kind of conversations that are in parallel to what you might have experienced in the physical world as you were growing up will help your children kind of understand the good and the bad of exposure to all of this, both great and not so great media and online spaces. So hopefully that was really helpful for you. Please pick up our freebie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Chrissy has linked it here, and I will put my blog post in here too, so you have access to that. And if you aren't already subscribed to our newsletter, please do that, because we've got more stuff coming out over the next couple of weeks, and we're really excited and passionate about sharing all of this stuff with you because we know it's so important for you as parents. So thank you so much for taking this 17 minutes to watch this video today, and look forward to seeing you next time. And you will have Chrissy next week sharing some more awesome content on our Eduro Learning Facebook page. Thanks so much. See you next time. Bye.